About 2,000 years ago, in a narrow, unimportant slice of the Roman Empire, a baby was born. This baby arrived in a city that wasn't his home at a moment overrun with crowds when all the usual guest rooms were full. He survived his humble birth. That says something in the day and age. That came in a cave or a stable or in the shared sleeping space between people and animals in the back of the Cataluma. He went home with parents who were engaged to be but not yet married. Those parents didn't draw much attention as they were poor and unimportant, but their baby did garner some notice at birth from local shepherds and foreign priests alike, who both believed that baby was a message for all humankind. The baby dropped out of history's sight for about 30 years, but then he reappeared, fully grown, as an itinerant rabbi, walking through the region of Galilee and ancient Palestine, sparking talk of change and revolution that just grew and grew for 3 years until he was executed by Rome. 4 primary accounts of the man's life survive, kept in scrolls first and then manuscripts and now books. They say that this baby, who was born just like us, was in fact like us, and also nothing like us, born the Son of God. The writings say that as an adult, he performed miracles. He healed diseases, mended spirits, comforted the least, and upset the greatest. The keepers of the empire deemed him crazy and dangerous, a liar. They plotted his death. But the people who knew him best, the people who saw him die, and the people who saw him back alive in the same human body 3 days later, say surely he was and still is the Son of God, our awaited Christ. Those people were so convinced that they built an entirely new way of life around the way he taught them. That's the story of Jesus in roughly 2 minutes. I hope I kept it under. I did have to leave plenty out, but you probably thought about those details I was skipping as I went along, because, point being, we pretty much all know this story. And we probably know the beginning of it best of all, especially if we grew up in church. I wonder why then, even in these modern days, does the church spend 4 weeks every year just getting to the birth part of the story? Is there really that much more to uncover? Well, here's what I think. I think we anticipate Jesus' coming or advent for 4 straight Sundays, not because we need to learn what we don't know, but to figure out again what we need to hear. What is it for us? What stands out for us in Jesus' origin story? What comforts us? What challenges us? What hits us different this year? And what is ours to do in response to whatever it is we've heard? That kind of figuring takes some time. I believe that God is always revealing something fresh and anew in the practices we keep, in the scriptures we read, and the stories we tell when we choose to wait for Christ's birth again. I think Jesus is a revelation of God. And revelations don't just download themselves into our human consciousness. They dawn on us a little more slowly. We often arrive at them as we participate in the revelation by doing our own thinking and feeling. I think that's our work this year. It is my very best plan for the lot of us who gather in this room on Sundays. I think we should spend Advent thinking and feeling our way through pretty familiar territory, just trying to increase our odds of a revelation. I think that we take some time and we make some space for God's self to be born again into our own worlds this year. For the next 2 weeks, I'm going to talk about making room in our minds, in our lives, in our community. And after that, we're going to invite another voice in to talk about preparation in his own thought process. Senior Minister Chris Pulliam is going to preach here the 3rd week of Advent, and I'll swap pulpits with him. And then the last Sunday before Christmas, I really hope that we stage a kind of storytelling Sunday so that you hear voices of our own, more and more voices from our own. If you're willing to share up front or have a story to tell me that I can tell them, I'll give you a few prompts and an official invitation at the end of the day. So how do we make room, more room, for something already so well known? I think questions are the way. We just start to ask ourselves what strikes us as strange, jarring, interesting about Jesus' birth. What about it is weird that we maybe have never let ourselves think of as weird before? What parts are our favorites? Every year, what are we drawn to? What do we love? What do we find compelling? All questions are fair, because whatever connects personally to us tends to land most deeply in us, and that's where the work happens. Whatever we really notice, again or for the first time, will often lead us to more thinking, and we are our own best guides into what is ours to do about it. The trick is, I don't really know which questions will speak to your soul. Only you know that, and you're only going to know as it happens. So I just have some ideas to get us started. Maybe something helpful. Maybe it will spark something in you. But then, let me say, you are on your own for the question asking for the rest of this week. I leave you with the assignment to mull over the nativity story, just in your pockets of waiting time or in between time, maybe idle time. Make some observations, ask some questions of yourself. Mine, first, have you ever wondered why God would entrust his only son to human beings as an infant? Like an infant, not even like a sturdy toddler, but an actual newborn child. If you've been around one of those any length of time, you know that they're pretty fragile. Now, we take this part for granted, that Jesus came as a baby. We know it really well, but is it not kind of weird? A human infant is, of all the kinds of mammals, the most fragile creature, the one that needs the most care and has the least control over their well-being. They can't fix anything that goes wrong. They can't remove themselves from harm. And even in loving, caring families, babies don't always survive the conditions of being infants. When they're that small, that dependent, not yet developed. Things happen, sickness, accidents, and when they do, babies are always at the highest risk. Friends, to make a joke that's also a real point, if you look behind me at that Holy Family, it doesn't have a baby Jesus in it, because we who run this service cannot even keep that porcelain Jesus undamaged. Like, he is in 3 parts. I mean, right now they're glued together. They're, hopefully going to last. Next week, all things being equal, given any luck, you will see baby Jesus back in his mother's arms. But right now, he fell apart and had to be repaired. So human beings aren't even that careful with things we revere. And God knows it's true. I think it took some incredible level of trust for God to allow any human family, any kind of community, to raise his own son from a baby. That God even allowed it is just wild to me. And then to think that God willed it. Well, that's unexpected. I find that weird, but also pretty wonderful. I wonder, what on earth was that like? And what does it mean for God's self, who existed before people, to start again at humans' own beginning? I think it speaks to how much we're loved, what kind of God we've got. A God who truly loves and likes humanity. Because sending a baby is not a transaction with people. We are already so far beyond born to save us from our sins, just that he was born at all. The fact that Jesus arrives as a baby takes me out of the mindset that he had to come to earth, had to live in order to die. Because in fact, I think God was in it for so much more. I think God wants to be in a relationship with people, all human people, that God so loves us, so craves fellowship and connection with us that God became us for a while. Not as an adult, not for a short period of time and the one-time transaction of the cross, but for the full human experience. And God trusted human beings to give Jesus that experience. For me, the fact that Christ comes as an infant says that God opens a relationship with the whole world. And for me, the fact that humanity still gets entrusted with babies is proof that God hasn't given up on us yet. That God still wants to be in a relationship with humanity, still sees good in us, still entrusts us with sheer potential, with all goodness. That we will mess up just a little bit, God knows. But so often that we'll get right enough that the love inside us expands because we welcomed in a new life, a new person. And in that way, more of heaven comes here. I marvel over the baby part of the nativity. And also, this other part I find really compelling, and some years I forget to question, is how about all those lights in the night in the story of Jesus? So many sources of light or references to light, and all of it for all of us. Some are real or literal, because there's a light of a star that guides Magi to the baby. And before that, there's some kind of light in the sky that appears to the shepherds, causes them to be sore afraid, as Linus says in Charlie Brown. Some are more metaphoric lights, because Jesus is called the light of the world. I bet you've heard. I love the idea that as the stories were preserved, Jesus arrives in the literal dark of a night and in a time people were experiencing as dim or hard to navigate. It was a time that God had not revealed God's self through a messenger in over 400 years. So Jesus is both what God is showing people in a spotlight, and Jesus is the actual light that breaks through the shadows of the human condition. Light is just my favorite metaphor for Jesus' arrival on earth. I love all the verses where it shows up. And I like how my mind naturally connects to lots of things whenever I think about how it works to see light in the dark. Let me share some of the light passages, one each from two different Gospels. In Luke chapter 1, before Jesus is born in chapter 2, a cousin of Jesus' mother Mary is also expecting a child. So Mary's pregnant with Jesus, and Elizabeth and Zechariah are also expecting a child. An angel greets the dad, Zechariah, with this news and leaves him completely mute until his son is born. And then all of a sudden, new dad, Zechariah, starts to prophesy what the angel had told him to all the people. He says his own son will go before the Lord, and then he says, by the tender mercy of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. The dawn from on high will break upon us to guide our feet. And where are we headed in this fresh light? Into the way of peace. The gospel writer John also uses light pretty famously. He has a birth story too. You might not recognize it because it's just like a few lines in the very first verse, but it's catchy. Here's John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. A few sentences later, John writes, what came into being through the Word was life, and that life was the light for all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness doesn't extinguish the light. In older translations, that line says, and the darkness cannot overcome it. You may remember that. I like both translations. I like remembering the night is still dark when we only have a candle or a flashlight or a torch. But that higher volume of darkness doesn't eliminate that smaller volume of light. Just look in the corner of our room. It's a little bit the opposite, actually. Huge swaths of night sky can be revealed by just one campfire, one flashlight, one torch. Light has incredible reach and power. And I think it must always have been true. I think It's so true and fundamental for people that God has used it for us as a truth. Because if you think about it, Jesus is not the only light God has ever sent to us. All God's lights have reached into places of need to rescue and restore. Since a bush burst into flame in front of Moses, since columns of fire appeared at night for the wandering Hebrew people, since a day's worth of oil in a menorah burned for 8 straight days, Jesus appears in a long line of light signs God sends. And I guess that thought makes me wonder, so what's different this time? What's different or unique in this story that starts our own faith? Well, I think in the Son of God becoming a literal human person who is born on earth, all the different kinds and types of illumination God has offered people become one. They connect and they synthesize in this place. In Jesus' birth is the nexus of the human and the divine. Not God's only light, but the brightest light in any night. Because in Jesus comes a God who understands and suffers with. Because I've lived some long, metaphoric long, dark nights. They sometimes happened in the day, and they sometimes happen for weeks or months on end. I really get that idea that Jesus is a light in the night. I think it takes some grieving or longing for people to connect to it, but live long enough and you'll get some of that. I think for people whose next steps are unsure, seem kind of shrouded in shadows, people who don't know where to go, people who have hurt or still hurt and find their pain hard to reconcile. People in lots of different conditions. Anyone really walking in darkness can receive this story as good news. It's reassuring news. Not that anything about our lives changes immediately, but that we do not have to suffer alone. That we do not suffer alone. The dawn always starts when it's still night. And for a long time, nothing much seems to be happening. But the light interrupts the darkness. And we are told the light that's coming again will guide our feet into the way of peace. My hope and prayer for us is that we each get some kind of revelation of light dawning for us this week as we think and feel more on our own about what it means to us to remember Jesus' birth and to mark another Christmas. I pray that we make room for questions that come and follow their lead. Let the questions be. Own them as your own. Because somewhere in this story you already know is something you didn't know you need. I think it's waiting for us. And I can't wait over these next few weeks to uncover more. So may it be for all of us. Amen.